up guys, Becca here from the Artist Underground. Today we're going to do a free drawing lesson on a frontal view of a lady. This image is in black and white, which should help us to translate those darks and lights into a nice pencil sketch. We're going to talk about the basic shapes of the head and the eyes and the nose, hopefully thinking about those complex shapes as more simple three-dimensional forms will help you to capture the realism of the image better. So let's get started. Okay, so I've got my hard pencil and my soft lead and an eraser. We're going to start with the basic shapes of the face. I'm going to show you on the image here. It's going to look a little funny, but I'm going to break this up a little bit. So we've got a circle that creates the basic round part of the skull. It's really helpful to draw a straight line straight through the circle. And that's where you're going to line up your eyebrows and your eyes and your lips. A lot of times when we do sketches, if the eyes aren't in line, it looks a little off. That's one of the main issues with the realism that we can have. We're going to do the chin. In her case, she has a fairly square jaw with a nice square chin, so we're just going to sketch that in. Doesn't have to be perfect. We're just kind of outlining the face here. Notice that the bottom of the circle is kind of in between the nose and the lips. Here we go with another line straight down for the nose. Obviously, it's not straight on your page, it's at an angle. And then the line for the lips is pretty much straight, parallel to the line for the eyes. When you look at the eyes, they're spaced fairly evenly apart. And if you look at the space in between each eye, it's about the same size. So if you can put 4 marks on there at an equal distance, you'll line up your eyes pretty well. The nose is 3 different circles, 1 larger for the center, and then 2 smaller circles for the nostrils. And they don't have to be perfect, just get them in there so that we can start getting the shape of that nose. Something that's really helpful to remember is that the eye that you see is only a small portion of the eyeball. So if you're drawing a skull, you draw the huge hole for the eye socket, right? So that eyeball is much larger than the eye itself. So imagine that circle there. Also notice that there is pretty much equal distance between the eye and the nose and the mouth. I'm going to start to draw in the eyelids. And remember, with those circles, imagine the eyelids are draped around the circle, that sphere that is your eyeball. So that the eyelid kind of drapes around, curves around that eyeball. There's the other curve. And then drawing in the iris itself. In general, the circle of the iris and the colored part of your eye you don't ever see the full circle. So it kind of ends before the eyelid. And the iris there in the middle. And kind of where the nose starts. In this image, it's pretty well defined, so it's easy to see where that nose starts. It's a nice contrast there. get in the eyebrows. She's got really boxy, beefy eyebrows, which are pretty awesome. So we're just gonna kind of shape those in there. And then start to outline the nose. If we imagine the nose as those 3 circles, it's going to make it much easier to get that shape right. We've got the nostrils, which in her case, her nose is turned up a little bit, so you're going to see the underside of the nose and the nostrils a little bit. And then that space in between the nose and the mouth. With the, I think they call it a Cupid's bow, right? That definition there is really nice. It adds kind of more shape to her lips. I'm going to look at where the lips end and kind of draw a line straight up from where her eyes are. The lips kind of seem to end right in the middle of her eye, maybe a little bit to the center on both sides. So if you put a mark on your page, when you're doing that, it kind of helps you to space the lips out. And we're still just doing a really rough blocking in of all of this stuff. So if it doesn't look perfect, don't worry. As you'll see, for me, I actually will go back in and make some changes here in a little bit, because it's not exactly as true to the image as I would like it to be. So going back in, kind of editing the chin and the jawline a little bit. And notice how the jawline kind of runs parallel to her lips a little bit. Just being aware of the relationship from one part of the image to the next, the distance between the corner of her lip and her jaw, the distance between the bottom of her lip and her chin, and how those are I almost create 2 parallel lines. Also looking at the distance between the outside of her eye and the side of her face. That's a distance that frequently, and I know at least I get too large, and if it's too large, it makes the face look too wide. Just kind of putting in her hairline here, super gently. We're not really going to focus on the hair too much today. Same thing over here. We're looking at the space between the edge of her eye and the side of her face. And a lot of times the side of your face is in shadow. So even though realistically maybe you have a little bit more flesh there, it's not going to show up as much, especially here with her hair. It's kind of covering it. I'm gonna erase here. I'm speeding it up just so the video is not super long, but if you need to pause, go ahead. And then I'm kind of re-outlining some of the stuff that I ended up erasing. Remember, when I'm drawing, I'm pushing a little harder than I'd like you guys to with that. The original first impressions and first mapping out of your drawing needs to be really light, so it's easy to erase. So got everything erased. I'm looking at the image and I'm looking at my drawing and kind of starting to add a few more details, a few more just kind of, well, I'm just making it look, try to look as much like the photo as possible. Defining the lips a little bit more. She's got some pretty great lips, and then her chin kind of curves around. Let's put in the neck. And her neck is a little wider than what it looks like, but because of the shadows of her hair, it's gonna not show up as much. And we're gonna get in that hair. Again, this is not a hair tutorial, so don't worry too much about the hair. We're really focusing on realism and getting this face to look as much like the image as we can. Okay. So I'm looking at the image now and I'm thinking her lips are a little too big, and also the space between her eyebrows and her forehead is not quite large enough. So this is a really good example. Artists do this all the time. We get something down on paper and then we realize that it's not quite proportionally accurate. We've got to erase some of that and just start over, and that's okay. That's going to happen. It's very normal, and it's a good way for you guys to edit your work and to start learning how to fix it when it's not exactly perfect. So I raised the forehead up quite a bit. Fix that forehead, fix the hair. That's looking better. Then I also am going to make the lips slightly smaller. Sometimes when there's a large feature on someone's face, like her lips are fairly large, it's easy in your mind to make them even bigger than they actually should be. So, which is what I did here. So take time to stop, back up, look at your image, look at your drawing, and edit it. That's something that we do often. I also noticed that the nose is a little bit too small, so I made that a little bit larger. And just erasing. And then I'm going to start here pretty soon to add some more shadows once I get the face pretty close to what I think it should be. So here we go. I'm going to pick the darkest spots, the eyes, the shadow on the eyelid and the eyelashes, and then going into the detail on the eye itself. Remember, the eyeball is round and it's coming out from below the eyelid. So you've got lots of shadows on the eyelid and around that eyeball. That's going to help with the realism as well. She's got some really beautiful eyes with a nice dark ring around the edge, which is always fun to draw. So we're just kind of putting in the darkest values. Making sure to shade those eyeballs. We always think of the white in the eye as white, but it's not. It's very close to the lightest tone on her skin, if you look at that. So the highlight in her eye is white, or much whiter, and then the white in her eye is going to be a lighter mid-tone. I'm blocking in those eyebrows. I'm going to use some of that darker lead, the softer lead, just to get a little bit more of a dark contrast. And then bouncing, when I get to this point, I start bouncing back and forth between my darker, softer lead and my harder lead. The harder lead, in general, it's easier to get a little more detail, a little sharper lines, and then the softer lead is darker, and we can get more shadows in there. At this point, I'm going to start adding more lead to my page, kind of blocking in the darker spots, and spreading that pencil lead with my finger. Now this is a practice sketch. We're working on realism, and getting that image as close to the photograph as possible. So I'm not really too worried about the perfect strokes of my pencil as I'm shading. I'm just gonna start adding lead and kind of moving it around on the page with my pencil and with my finger. So as you'll see, I'm gonna start moving a little quicker. Like I said, this is practice. It's not supposed to be the most perfect photorealistic pencil drawing, so I'm not too worried about having some pencil lines, some sketchy lines in there, because we're just working on blocking in those lighter and darker shapes. There goes the next eyebrow with my thick lead. I'm noticing that my eye, you'll see my eye, the points, the center points of my eyes are slightly off. And that's really a big issue when it comes to does the face look right? If the eyes are slightly off, if they're not in line, it's gonna look off. So I like to draw a line between those points right across the bridge of the nose and kind of line those up, and that's really going to help you with the finished image, making it look realistic. Okay, here we go, adding some more lead to the page, starting to darken in around the face. The face is round, just like a ball, so if you think about learning how to shade a ball, the light on her face is hitting kind of central, kind of a little bit to the right hand side. So the left hand side of her face, if we're looking at the left side of her face is a little bit darker, and the edges of the face are going to be darker as they round back away from the light. Adding detail to that Cupid's bow, darkening in the edges of the nose. If I'm going too fast, you can always pause this video and kind of catch up with what's going on here. But if you just want to take it from here and look at that photo and just start adding your own details, that's a really good way to teach yourself how to look at an image and then replicate what you see. Always the nose in between the bridge of the nose and straight down to the tip of the nose is always going to be a little bit lighter, and then it kind of gets darker as it goes farther away from the viewer, but not so dark that it really stands out. It's a gradual shading there. I'm noticing that her chin is a little bit too short. As I'm looking at the image, I think her chin drops down a little bit farther than what I have. So again, as we're drawing, we're constantly editing. And it's easier to fix it before you get too far into it. So I'm just going to erase that tip of the chin there and make it a little bit longer. Looks much better. All these little tiny details that you notice as you're looking at the image are going to really make a big difference when you're finished. The line in between her lips is really dark, and then we're starting to round out the bottom lip. You'll notice that the bottom lip is quite a bit darker than the top lip. So we're just kind of adding in those shapes, and if you draw some lines that are curved around her lip, that will really help. You'll see me do that here in just a minute. That'll really help. There we go. Kind of make that lip look round. Top lip is quite a bit lighter, and that transition between her skin and the top of her lip is much less defined than we think it is. I remember always trying to draw out my lips and then having that line be so obvious, and it just didn't look quite right. So I kind of smooth out that line. The color of the skin is not all that much different from the top of your lip to the lip itself. I'm using my finger to spread that pencil lead. It's really helping to smooth out, make the skin look a little softer, and spread that lead so I'm not having to fill every single space on the page with a stroke. I can just kind of spread it with my finger. Going in here, adding some more definition to her forehead and to her hair. I'm not going to spend too much time on her hair, but I'm just basically using it to define the edges of her face and her neck. We're going to get really dark hair down by her neck. Really defining that line between her chin and her neck. Will make her face kind of pop out a little bit. Your neck has quite a few different shapes to it. We think of a neck as kind of like a cylinder, but the center part does kind of stick out a little bit farther, and adding a little bit more definition to your neck is really going to make it seem more real. So I like to add a little bit extra. Pay a little more attention to that detail even when it's in shadow, because it just makes that neck feel more realistic. With the hair, just be loose. Don't take too much time. Sometimes if you kind of let your arm and wrist go a little looser and just kind of swoop those strands, it'll look more effortless, more realistic than if you try to get it exactly perfect. Again, when I'm adding these shadows, I don't really need to make them perfect with my pencil. I can just get the lead down on the page and then move it around with my finger. And that makes the skin look softer with more gradients and not so sharp as you would do with a pencil. Plus it's faster. And when we're working on practice drawings and things like that, I'm okay with speeding up the process a little bit, because you're learning and you're practicing blocking in these shapes and creating a more three-dimensional image. kind of like eating with your hands, right? You use the pencil as your utensil or your tool, and then at some point it's just easier to eat with your hands, draw with your fingers. So something that you can do, especially after smearing all that lead around, is grab your eraser and really focus on creating some highlights. Look at the brightest spots on her face, her nose, kind of that bridge of her nose between her eyes, and then a few little spots on her chin and her cheek. Just lightening those up a little bit with the eraser is going to really help add more contrast. I'm going to go in to add the eyelashes. She's got quite a few, and eyelashes curve, and they kind of curve in the direction that the skin is going. And remember, those eyeballs are round, so the curve of the eyelashes goes in all different directions. And I've also found that with drawing, if you don't need to add all those little lines. Sometimes it can get too busy. So just hinting at those eyelashes is going to really help. I'm going to darken in the eyeballs a little bit more. Add a little bit more contrast there. It'll heighten the realism a little bit more as well. That eyelid, the top eyelid is fairly large, and that shadow underneath that eyelid, if you can get that in there, that really helps to make those eyes look a little rounder. I'm taking my eraser there to add a little more highlight to those lightest spots in the eye. And just kind of at this point editing a little bit more, adding a little more shadow, heightening the contrast between the darkest darks and the lightest lights. It's going to add much more interest to the drawing overall. Notice that her jaw on the right hand side is pretty square. I will go in and kind of clean that up and add a little more shadow to that, and it'll make it feel less square here in a minute. There we go. Just kind of smoothing that out. There's quite a shadow there anyways, but I think I had it a little wider than it should have been. And there we go. We are just about done. You could spend more time on the hair. You could spend more time adding deeper shadows to the eyes and around the cheekbones. But that's pretty much all I have for you today. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed it. Have a good day.